Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Bonaventure, and this is officially the Global Soft in AI workshop. So it's a new affinity group at NeurIPS, and the main objective is to offer a kind of annual multidisciplinary academic meeting or meetup with the idea of like being very diverse, inclusive in the NLP community and research space, in order to promote exchange of research achievement in language, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So there are many accepted papers, posters. Organizers are coming, and then like there's going to be the poster section, so feel free to attend. And yeah, without further delay, I think I'll start with my presentation, which is titled Building Efficient Language Technologies for and Resources for African Languages. So my name is Bonaventure Dossou, and I have mainly a background in mathematics and like computer science, interested like in other bioinformatics sciences. And I'm not a linguist, but I somehow love like working on languages and like building language technologies for low resource languages. So I've worked on like NLP for low resource language, African language, developing, for instance, FFR, which is the first and at this date the only one existing machine translation model for my language, mother tongue, from my home country. And I also been like building language technologies for as many as African languages as possible. And on the other side, I also have like interesting passion for machine learning for healthcare, doing drug discovery, medical imaging, and like gene therapy. So today, I'm going to think about, go through that journey and like talk about what language technology is, what is a resource and why does it matter, going then like to the language discoverability, talk briefly about LandFrika, a work that I've been like putting effort in with a friend and the Masakaneh community, and then like present like an effective, efficient way of building language technology, which is going briefly to highlight a recent paper that is going to be of mine and some quote that is going to be presented at EMNLP, and finish by some like pictures, like some ideas, some dreams that I have as an NLP low resource language researcher. So we can start by what is definitely language technology. So I define it as a very interesting system that deals with human language, just as simple as it is. Now we have like many examples of like language technologies. We have like Google Translate, we have speech recognition, like Alexa, Siri does like for speech recognition, and we also have like many keyboards, sorry for a typo, and autocomplete systems, games as well, anything that comes in and that promotes the language. Now, I was wondering if you are aware of those, for instance, statistics. So this first picture here is technically showing us the number of African languages supported by existing voice assistant. So you have Siri, you have Alexa, and Cortana from Microsoft, I think, and definitely the language of African language representation is 0. There's none. Here you can see about like translation systems. So the highest is with Google Translate, and DeepL and like Yandex Translate have like very little to none. If you come on this, let me call it pie chart, you will see that African language represent a very big part, 31% of the all existing languages. So here we have European, we have India, we have like all of the existing, but African languages on their own represent already 31%. But then, why don't we have as much, or at least like some tangible amount of like language technologies in those in those languages. So I think that something is imbalanced, and that's what leads me to the problem of like language resource. There are many types of language resources. For instance, I was talking about softwares. There are also datasets. Like as researcher, we mainly focus on like datasets. For instance, having dataset for machine translation, question and answering, anything of the sort. And also those datasets also usually come from like things, websites like Wikipedia pages. But the thing is, there are no or very little Wikipedia pages written in those African languages. I think there might be just like very few ones. For instance, Igbo has BBC or Swahili, but for the other big majority, there are no search like platform to where you can access information directly in those languages. And of course, there is research. Research papers. I mean, here it can be like in AI, it can be linguistics, documentation of like existing like literatures, like syntax, morphology of the language, anything that can help build or advance the language. So it matters because without those, for instance, like without data, for instance, you cannot build a language technology, at least not from the AI perspective. You can't. If you don't have like some initial data on the language, you can't start building an ML method or machine on it, right? So it is crucial and it's important to have it. But then we might then question, where are the languages or like resources of African languages? Turns out, I won't say that they are not, because definitely people speak those languages, so they are definitely resources, but they are hidden, like they are not discoverable on the internet, not at all. So for instance, you will go and you will be willing to find a data set, for instance, about Goom, which is the other native language of mine, but why am I, for instance, working on phone? There are no like big deal, like no data set like for on Goom, for instance. And anything existing on phone have been like mainly personal effort and also like effort from like communities like Masakane and like other people who are interested in the language, right? So if you type phone today, most of research paper you will see will be work of myself and the community, Masakane community. So it shouldn't be like that, because if a language which is spoken by more than on average 1.7 and 2 million people should not be so like invisible on the internet. So that leads me to one idea I've been working on with a friend, Chris, who is not here, called LandFrika, which is initially the one of the key component is to make those language resources accessible. So we call it LandFrika, it's not the language of Africa, it's just it doesn't really have like a particular meaning, but we are just trying to connect all African language resources together. So it's already on, and like people have been already using it very like often, and it's very like user friendly, and like we got many feedback from it. So what are the key things from LandFrika? So we have, for instance, most of the time, like big tech, they come and they just want to exploit or use like those people from indigenous communities as just like data creators. They don't really like give as much back. For instance, people might be working on like annotating pictures for like a big company, but then just get a very miserable salary, and just once per month. But this is not normal, because those are still kind of intellectual properties that people who are kind of working on those type of tasks, which are crucial because companies and like researchers build like very interesting application on those, so that the work should not be under like belittled. So is a way of like also like getting some kind of commercial license, and like have a percentage, for instance, of giving back to those people who are putting in the effort and time and creating those language resources, which are crucial for the development of technologies. And it is also a very big hub For instance, for African data set, like we have already more than 800 or 900, soon approximating 1,000 records like tools, research papers, data set, all those type of things for like African languages. So currently we are focusing on African languages, but the goal is like to extend to low resource language, because there are also like underrepresented languages out there, but we are starting from like what we know mostly about. So and of course, by doing that, we're making those resources more discoverable, because you can easily just go on LandFrika and then like search the language like you want to have resources from. And it's been also a very interesting experience for me, because I've learned about language that I have never heard of before. So that's briefly about LandFrika. You can go and check it out and reach out if you have like any question. Now, how to build efficient African language technologies with few data, which is something that we talk about: language technology resources, see how it's connected to the language, the lack of like language resource, how it's connected to lack of discoverability. But then how can we use the small amount of data that we have to build like something very important and interesting? So here I'm going to briefly talk about a paper of ours that have been like accepted at EMNLP. So those are my co-authors. They are across the world. One is from Mexico, one is from Sweden, one is from like Spain, one is from the US, one is in Germany. We are all from Africa, and also all like affiliated to the Masakani community. So in this paper, we tried to build a multilingual pre-trained language models for African languages. If you see here, you can see that only if like we omit Afro-LM, the model that we built, there are only 2 Afrocentric pre-trained language models, like AfriBeta that has been built from scratch, and AfroXLMR that was accepted recently at Colin, and that David presented this morning at the Black in AI workshop. If you look at the distribution of like the number of sentences per language across the data set that we have, we're covering 23 of them, you can see that the majority is like very low, around like 10,000 or 5,000, you know, like, and everyone knows, especially with like pre-trained language models, that we tend to make them rely like on like huge amount of data. So how can we use this very small data set, or at least like in average very small, because we still have like some languages we have like enough like millions of sentences, but the other majority do not. So how can we use this data set to build like very interesting and like high performing model? This is where active learning comes in. So active learning is very like, I guess, well known in the machine learning space. Like at conference like NeurIPS here, you will hear about it a lot, but it hasn't been explored in the NLP space. So it was a kind of new concept that we were kind of introducing. Now, definitely is a kind of semi-supervised like training approach, learning algorithm, in which what you're trying to do is like kind of dynamically and also consistently. Consistency here is the key, because throughout the active learning round, what you want is, according to your metrics, you want the performance to be like increasing, or at least like steady. You don't want it to drop. You don't want like to have like ups and downs like anyhow, you know, because it doesn't show like a good performance of improving. So what you want is that consistency, and it is a kind of algorithm in which that model that you are trying to build tries to learn to sample, or like to learn to sample. There are many approaches to select those new samples to generate them, but according to very specific phenomena, what you want is like those new samples that you are generating and like kind of adding to the initial data set and retraining, like restarting the whole cycle. You want your model to be able to select those ones that you think, that it thinks. Of course, a model does not think, but it's just like a way of speaking, will be mostly beneficial to its learning by optimizing the different parameters and all, you know. So very few papers have explored that, and what most people have done is technically let me call it a monolingual approach. So for instance, if you have like n different language, you have n different BERT model, which is like very expensive. So if we were to do this for 23 languages, it might be expensive. So that's also another novelty, like we tried the multilingual approach. But in all of those, they have been used like for kind of clinical tests, prediction or NER, token classification, those type of things. The work showed that this made active learning is like very like data efficient, because only with like 20% of the labeled data, you can achieve as high as 98 or 99 accuracy. And of course, accuracy depends on like the task. Like it's not like kind of like perfect metric. So, but that's just like the general opinion. And this is very interesting and very crucial for the context of African NLP, which I was saying has very not enough data, but at least the data that can be discovered, that can be used, is not publicly accessible. So the scope of like data, I guess, that one can use is like restrained, is like, I don't know, like, yes, let me just use restraint. It's small, if I can say so, because you cannot use something that you don't know about or that you cannot find. So whatever you can find there is pretty small. So that is an interesting approach that can be used. And just a disclaimer, I have applied this, for instance, in the context of drug discovery. And you work there, and I was like, okay, so why not apply it to the context of language? So it also shows how like multiple disciplines, ideas can come together to like build and like improve solutions. So this is technically the framework we built. So we have a data set of like different languages, because we call our model our self-active learning. So it's like the model is like we are trying to optimize it, and at the same time using it like to generate the new samples. So what we do is like we have the initial data set, or the data set I would say, and then we split it like randomly into two parts with a given percentage. Here you can find the details like in our paper. We didn't do a kind of ablation study to see, okay, how much the percentage you choose to split those two data sets like impact the performance. We haven't, at least not yet. So then you use the training data set to train the model in the active learning framework. And then you do, I think this is one of the key parts of the thing, where you like technically take some sentences from the in the header data set, or that can be seen here as an evaluation. And what you do is you mask out like a part of the sentence, and you take the remaining as prompt. And then you do a kind of next to token in like prediction, next to token prediction or generation multiple times until, for instance, you reach the initial length of the length of the original initial sentence. And then, of course, here there are many ways to select those like generated sequence, but because it was kind of a proof of concept, what we started was technically just like using the first and a top-based like token candidate to build in that iterative way the new sentences. And then all of that is added back to the initial data set, and then like the scope is like the round is like restarted. So this is a kind of picture of like one single active learning run. Now the results are pretty interesting. We tried it like on NER. We used the Massacana 1 and 2 data set that also David introduced this morning. And the first one, Massacana data set, covers like 10 languages, African languages, and the second one covers 21 of them, including some of like the initial of the version 1. We also tried like some text classification task, and because this model has been trained exclusively in news domain data, so we tried like some kind of sentiment analysis experiment, which here are acting a little bit as like out of domain, because NER data were from news domain, text classification also was from news domain, but sentiment analysis got it from like movies domain and like Twitter domain, those type of things. So what we can see here is there on both tasks. So for instance, Afro LM outperformed AfriBeta, MBERT, and XLMR. like we can see that the performance is the best. And I will like share why this is important after. We can also see that on the test classification task, AfriLM and AfriBeta have similar performance, even though on one or two, so for instance here for Hausa, the AfriBeta is performing relatively better, and like Yoruba is the opposite. Now on sentiment analysis, we try two settings. So we just perform like some type of like zero shot, like just fine tuning and evaluating the model on like movies data, Yosem, Yoruba movies data. And then the second approach is to adapt the model to the Twitter domain, which was like using the Niger Santi like data set, also like focusing on African languages, and then like evaluate it on Yosem like movies data. And in both cases, we can see that Afro LMR model like performs generally better, suggesting some better generalization. Now, what I wanted to show was that if we look at those performance and we look at the size of the pre-trained data set, there's a huge difference. If, for instance, you consider AfriBeta has been like trained with around 1 gig of data, okay, and MBERT and SLMR has been trained like with terabytes of data. So you can see that the gap between those two different pre-trained language models are huge, but still, there is a lot of like the AfroLM like outperform each of them. So we use very less of amount of data, but still outperform huge, large, big scale like language models. So I think in general, like our approach was like very data efficient and high performing, and achieve like state of the art on like many test classification, sentiment analysis, and like any other data set on African languages, and generalize is better. So sorry, I'm hurrying up. So I think what we need to do, what I think one can do, and like each one of us has like its own opinion, is we need to focus on like creating more resources for African languages, and also more resources, more applications. We need to engage in more like community effort, because like individually we cannot be doing that. For instance, I'm here talking about form, maybe someone is working on it. So maybe someone can profit from what I've been working on, or I can profit from what the other person has been working on. So like there shouldn't be any clash, like or maybe repeating each other's like experiment. We can build instead on top of each other's like result, insight, and then advance like better and faster. So we also need to lead more Afrocentric research projects, and like have more representation in top tier conferences like NeurIPS, like AMNLP, those type of like spaces. And build and scale AI technologies to African languages. I think that's where I was talking about building products. And to end, I would like to, honestly, one of my dreams is to have an Alexa for my possible future kids, so that I can talk with them like in phone, or in my language. Also like having a very centered platform for African languages, translator, where, for instance, Ghana NLP is doing that for Ghanaian languages, those things centered where we can have very efficient technologies. Keyboards are also important, because how else are you going to type those like letters? So those efforts also needs to be like encouraged. And obviously more people like me getting interested in research, sometimes it gets very hard. Sometimes like you are not funded. Sometimes you are not, those type of things. So you need to have that passion, not just like follow the money or the trend, know that what you're doing is definitely not only maybe for you, but for the future generation, people is going to be profitable the most too. So that was mainly about me. I thank you for your attention. I think I went over time, but yes, if you have any question, I'm definitely here, and that's my email, and like, you can easily reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I did a kind of introduction from this. I did a kind of introduction from the website, but I don't know. Yeah, I read the mission, but I don't know.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm gonna disconnect this. Yes. Sorry.